Greetings, children of the screen, your friendly neighborhood nerd scum here, and it is once again that most glorious day of the year, Friday the 13th. So, for the first Friday the 13th of this year, that's right, we get another one in October, haha! For the first one of this year, we're going to be taking a look at my top 5 picks for the best looks of Jason Voorhees. That is, the adult Jason Voorhees, not the young Jason, not any of the non-Jasons. I'm looking at you over there, Roy. Don't look at me like that, okay? Alright? You don't count. You're not here for this, alright? So the last time I talked about Friday the 13th, I took a look at my top 3 picks for the best Friday the 13th movies, and there's going to be a link for that popping up right now. But without any further ado, let's talk about this year. Let's get into this. Let's do the damn thing, alright, guys? These are my top 5 picks for the best looks of Jason Voorhees. And coming in at number 5, we have Jason X. For Jason X, I am counting both looks in this movie. I know that this movie is very divisive amongst some fans, but I want to say here that this is at the bottom of the list, okay? It's in the number 5 position and it's there for a reason. And that is because this movie is a perfect example of looks that, in concept, are absolutely badass, but in execution are, they're pretty cool, The main costume for Jason is very simple, it's very straightforward, it very much feels like the thing that we see him wearing in the beginning of Jason Goes to Hell, or in, the last couple of movies in the numbered franchise. But then, on top of that, they have a brown leather straitjacket harness kind of thing that he's being used to be confined in, and after the beginning of the movie where he rips out and murders David Cronenberg, he just kind of has the tatters of that on there a lot. Now, people keep referring to it as a coat or a jacket, and when they say a jacket, they might mean straitjacket, but I think there's a distinction to be made there. But that is mostly because I have a personal bias against coats on Jason. That's right, I am firmly putting my feet down right now. I am staunchly anti-Jason coat. And the remnants of the straitjacket still have the kind of harness pieces that were keeping him chained up. It looks pretty cool in of itself, but when you actually get a shot of him really, from head to toe, it does look a little bit frumpy and it's not overly intimidating. While it looks good in close-ups, the overall, doesn't work quite as well. The other issue here is the mask. The mask does, on its own, look cool, but the very angular cuts of it, while they're meant to be kind of futuristic and intimidating, they don't feel as iconic. So when you combine that with the kind of lackluster effect of the overall ensemble, it's just not a great look. So then we have Uber Jason, which again, in concept is absolutely awesome. In execution is a little bit lacking. In fact, if you look at the barely in action figure that McFarlane Toys put out back in the day, it looks really cool, but it is essentially just a statue with 2 or 3 points of articulation. It actually looks cooler than the suit looks in the movie. A lot of times in the movie, and I don't know if it's because of the angles or the lenses that they're using, but he again looks very bloated, and he doesn't really, it's a cool design, but he doesn't look intimidating, and then you combine that with the fact that he doesn't really look like Jason anymore. This, first off, the mask should still look like Jason's mask. It should, in fact, actually look like the metal mask from Jason Goes to Hell, if we're being quite honest about it. That kind of had the same angular features as the mask that he was wearing earlier in the movie, but it's made of metal. It would make perfect sense, but maybe because people didn't like that movie, they didn't want to go that way. Either way, it doesn't look like Jason in the mask anymore. It looks cool, just not like Jason. And then when you move down, other than having the machete, there's nothing that is kind of pointing to the iconography of Jason. He just has a black leather suit on one side, and then you can see his flesh under the other side, and then he's got this plate armor. I personally think it would actually have been way more interesting for them to give him a normal looking hockey mask, but maybe metal, and then make the part of him that's cybernetic actually more cyberpunky. Don't make it just armor plating. He was blown to pieces, and this just looks like armor plating. This should be some weird body horror cyberpunk stuff, and this just falls flat. So neither of the looks are horrible, they both perfectly work within the movie that they are trying to make, this ridiculously awesome, fun, silly movie, but they just fall far, far short of the concept that is behind them, which could have been so much cooler, so hence, number 5 placement. And coming into the 4th position, we have Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. So on the face of it, there's nothing necessarily wrong with this design. It has all the key iconography of Jason intact. It has the same basic outfit that we'd seen him wearing when he was previously alive, more or less, and then over time he assembles some more tools and adds some more stuff to it, because this is the movie where Jason is the James Bond of serial killers. He has a utility belt with all kinds of fun little gadgets and toys in it. But there are just some elements to this that, again, in concept make it really cool, but in execution it's just a little bit lacking for me. The main problem for me with this is size and proportion. So for me, there is something seriously wrong with the size of his head versus the size of his mask. And while I really like the design of this mask and the look of this mask specifically, it just, on the shape of the head and the head size with the body size of the actor, just do not look right. It is not intimidating in any sense. And it's weird because this is the movie where we see Jason actually become the icon that he becomes. Like this, even though all the pieces were in place before this is really the first movie to revel in that iconography and really be like, yeah, this is fucking Jason. And again, the other issue that I have is not a huge issue, but it's just the size of the actor playing Jason. For me, this is way too far in the middle. So we just had a Jason that had been buried for many years, he was rotting, things were eating his dead corpse. So he should be extremely emaciated and skinny. So you should have almost like a zombie Jason, because that's what he looks like when he doesn't have the mask on, but what you end up seeing is a guy who's actually thin, lean, but very, very fit. He's not a very big, he's not a very imposing guy, which is what we had seen before. So I'm guessing that they were trying to imply that all that kind of shrinkage was from him being dead and all those things I just mentioned, but it just does not play that way. It's not scary enough for it to look like he's more zombified, and he's not as big as he was, so you lose a lot of the intimidating factor there. As much as I hate to say it, as much as this movie really is the first movie to revel in the Jason iconography in this way, in a lot of scenes in this movie, especially once you add all the extra things, the yellow gloves and all the things that make him kind of James Bondy in the director's mind, you end up very much with what looks like a guy in Jason cosplay. And again, it works fine in the movie. It's not overly distracting. The movie's really good, the costume design in of itself is really good, and it doesn't really hurt the movie, but for all those reasons, I couldn't put it further up on the list. And sliding right into the third position is Friday the 13th Part 2. That's right, guys, with this one we have the first appearance of Jason proper. Not Little Boy Dream Jason, or however else we want to interpret what we saw in the first movie at the end of it. The first time we see proper Jason. And none of the iconography that we will come to associate with the character of Jason is overly prevalent in this film. Notably, most of all being the lack of the hockey mask, which would not be introduced until Part 3 of the franchise. Here what we have is essentially Hillbilly Jason. He's got a pair of overalls, a plaid shirt on underneath that, some work boots, and an Elephant Man or Town That Dreaded Sundown burlap white sack over his head. Having said that, I know there's a lot of people who are going to be wondering, why does this even make the list? Like, yes, it's the first appearance of Jason, but it's not the iconic Jason, and it doesn't have any of the elements that we would come to be associated with Jason, and it just sounds like a guy with a sack on his head. That is exactly why it makes the list, is because not only is it just a guy, like when you think about the classic slasher, that is the kind of archetype. Eventually slashers would become these supernatural characters and these larger-than-life killers, but the reality is, like when you go back to the earliest archetypes of the killers in slasher movies, it's just a guy. And in that sense, this one very much works. And while the Sackhead Jason is not the most iconic version of the character, there is something very important about this, and that is the fact that the covering for his face is a plain, blank, white form that has a vaguely humanoid feature, and because of that, it allows you to project a lot of fear onto it. It is very unsettling, which is why that iconography of that kind of sack mask has been used for a long time with a multitude of different franchises and characters. As I said, you got the Elephant Man, you've got the Town That Dreaded Sundown, hell, Scarecrow from Batman has a burlap sack mask on his head, you know? It's been done multiple times. There's the guy from The Strangers. It just keeps going and going. There is an iconography here that is built into some part of our subconscious fears of the rural area, and because of that, And because, again, of him kind of just being a representation of the everyman slasher, even though that is not the icon that Jason would go on to be, I feel that this very simple, very straightforward, and very effective costume and design choice deserves a place on this list. And in the second position, we have Friday the 13th, Part 4. Now, I am putting Part 4 in this position because I do believe that it is the version of this costume that all of us like the best. It is the most iconic of this version of the costume. However, it should be stated that yes, this is the same costume from Part 3 where he gets the mask and we really introduce the iconography of what Jason will be, with the only real changes to the costume being a few cosmetic cuts and rips on the clothing here and there, a huge axe wound in the forehead, and the fact that the pants and the shirt are much dirtier than the previous movie, so they do appear a darker color, which is then also increased by the color timing that this movie has versus the last one, which had much more of a bluey color timing, and this one has a much more brown and earthy color timing. For this version of Jason, he is still a little bit bigger, he's a little bit bulkier, he's got more power to him, he runs, because Jason runs all the way up until the point where he dies. He's very careful and selective about when he runs, and I would even argue that after he dies, he still runs, you just don't really see it anymore. The point is, he is a much more athletic character, he's vicious, he is ferocious, and his costume is very utilitarian. We see his giant muscly neck disappearing into the button-down work shirt that he stole in the previous movie. Again, just found it off a clothesline. Same thing with the pants. And then, he's just got the random work boots. Again, you still have this thing very much where he's just dressed like some random regular guy. And the anonymity of that. And even when you know the Jason mythology, he just looks like this distortion of a normal person. Once you put that mask on top of the larger head and big shoulders and the big muscly neck, you have something that is the ordinary that has then been taken askew. And then when you add the damage and dirt from the previous movie, you get that taken to the next degree, which really, again, the last movie sets up the iconography. This solidifies the visual iconography of that character to a large degree. It doesn't really play with it because it doesn't really understand what that iconography has to offer, but with this movie they really did intend it to be the last movie, and they were really much more focused on that than kind of playing with this big iconography. It's really only after seeing the poor performance of the movie that would follow this that they realized what an icon they had created, and they would resurrect Jason, fully embracing the visual iconography of the character. And yes, I might be biased because Friday the 13th Part 4 is my favorite of the Friday the 13th films, but I think I am fully within my rights to say that when you're talking about classic Volume 1 pre-death Jason, Friday the 13th Part 4 is the pinnacle, iconic look for this character. And here we go, children of the screen, my number one pick for the best look of Jason Voorhees in the Friday the 13th franchise. It shouldn't be any surprise because he's sitting right here on either side of me. It's Jason from Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. While I said that Friday the 13th Part 4 is my favorite of the films, this movie is the second, and a lot of the reason for that is because of the depiction of Jason himself. Not only do you have the first appearance of Kane Hodder as the character of Jason Voorhees, giving him a physical vocabulary that defined the character like he had never had before, you also have his immense size adding to the kind of behemoth monster man that this character is. But even beyond that, the thing that really makes it for this look is the fact that you have the director, John Carl Buechler, who himself was a absolutely fantastic makeup special effects man, and when he took on this project, his number one goal with the look of Jason was to pay homage to every cut, every stab, every wound that this character had gotten from the beginning of the franchise to now. And when he designed this makeup with his team, he had them put all of it in there. Everything that has ever happened to Jason is represented on this, and because of that, you get something much more akin to what I would have expected out of Part 6, which is you get a Jason that looks like a emaciated zombie corpse. And he still manages to do that while looking big and imposing, but as he moves, you can see his frickin' spinal column and his ribs through his back, through his ripped shirt. You can see the bones in his forearms and in his knuckles and in his fingers and in his legs throughout various parts of the movie. Like, you can see cuts that open up on, like, pieces of flesh that look like maybe they're kind of diseased, but they're filling themselves back in. There are just all these little bitty things, like half of his frickin' mouth is exposed from the boat in part 6 whenever they hit him with the boat propeller. Like, it has everything in it, and when you combine that with Kane Hodder's absolutely fantastic performance as the character, you get, again, just this crystallization of everything that has been iconic about this character finally given true character. Because even in part 6, Jason doesn't really have a character. In previous movies, Jason more or less, with a few small exceptions here and there, has just felt like a blank slate. He's not really a character that's been developed, he just serves the function of being the killer in the movies. But in this movie, because you're putting all the character's history in a physical form on him, and giving it to an actor who knows how to portray the seething rage and unstoppability that this character would have to have at this point in the franchise, it just comes together absolutely perfectly. I don't know how else to say it. I would love to sit here and talk about just the look of this for the next frickin' hour, and I would just keep gushing over it. But the reality is, I'm just going to keep saying the same stuff. There's nothing bad about the look of Jason in this movie. It is absolutely perfect in every single way. Yes, it wouldn't have worked for earlier iterations of the film. Again, that's why Part 4 is in the second position, because for the Volume 1 Jason, pre-death, that is the peak. And for Volume 2, and I would say pretty much anything we've had ever since, there is not a better looking Jason on screen, in live action, in adult form, than Jason, portrayed by Kane Hodder in Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. It is the absolute very best top pick for the best looks of Jason Voorhees. Right on, children of the screen, so there you have it, my top 5 picks for the best looks of Jason Voorhees in the franchise. And okay, hey, I hear what you're saying right there. A bunch of you are already down there in the comments doing your little tiny feet thing going, oh, you didn't even talk about the makeup design underneath the mask for any of these, except for maybe just... Don't worry, there's a reason for that, okay? It's because I'm going to do a whole video just on ranking the makeup effects for Jason's face underneath the mask. There have been a lot of different variations, and I felt like in this video there really wasn't enough time for me to give those the respect they deserve. So just hush your fingers, alright? It's coming eventually. There's lots of Friday the 13th down the road. We got another one this year. But anyway, guys, having said that, like I said, these are my top 5 picks, but it's all kind of subjective for the most part, so let me know down in the comments below what your favorite design for Jason is. Unless you're one of those people who likes Jason with a coat on, in which case, fuck you, you're wrong, I'm right. Stay out of my comments section. No, I'm just kidding, guys. If you like Jason with a coat, that's fine. It's all subjective on this particular thing, so let me know down in the comments below, man. What's your favorite Jason look? Thank you very much for watching this video. I do really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave a like and share it with some friends. Also, if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure to subscribe so you can not only check out all the great Friday the 13th content I'll have coming out in the future, but just everything else I got going on here on the channel. Really appreciate it, guys. I hope you guys have a great Friday the 13th. Nerd Scum. Out. That threw dust in my eye. You shut up. I've got Jason here and he'll take you out, motherfucker.